In March 2007, the entertainment industry was shaken to its core. Hollywood Truth magazine published a headline so explosive it made the entire world of film hold its breath. The discovery of a secret notebook belonging to legendary actor Burt Lancaster, known to millions as the star of From Here to Eternity and remembered for marching alongside Martin Luther King during historic civil rights demonstrations. Lancaster was celebrated not only for his talent, but for his integrity and courage. Yet what lay inside this notebook was no memoir, no collection of nostalgic memories from Hollywood's golden age. Instead, it was a blacklist, a handwritten record of 14 names. These weren't forgotten figures or second-rate performers. They were the very icons who had defined an era, the shining faces once adored on screen and immortalized in history. But in Lancaster's eyes, they were something far darker. He called them the most malicious people Hollywood has ever produced. Each name was marked with stories of manipulation, cruelty, and betrayal. Why would a man like Burt Lancaster, respected, admired, and often the moral compass of his generation, choose to leave behind such a damning account? And what truths were so important that he risked tarnishing Hollywood's legacy forever? And so, with the notebook opened, we turn to the very first name on Burt Lancaster's infamous list, one of Hollywood's brightest stars, whose beauty masked a storm within. Elizabeth Taylor, the hidden storm. Behind the violet eyes to the world, Elizabeth Taylor was the ultimate screen goddess. Those violet eyes, the diamonds, the legendary romances. But inside Burt Lancaster's secret notebook, her name appeared at the very top of his blacklist. To him, Taylor wasn't just a glamorous star. She was a storm that left chaos wherever she went. In 1962, during the filming of Cleopatra in Rome, Taylor locked herself inside her dressing room for hours. The reason? A fellow actress had dared to wear a dress in the same color as hers. Production was forced to stop for 14 hours, while the entire cast and crew waited for her rage to cool. When the director finally pressed her to return to set, she hurled a glass of wine in his face, silencing everyone in the studio. This wasn't an isolated tantrum. Lancaster wrote that Taylor mastered the art of manipulation, bending producers, co-stars, and even husbands to her will. Her marriage to Richard Burton was less a love story than a high-stakes power struggle. She controlled his career, his finances, even his public image, while making Hollywood itself bow to her demands. Behind the glamour, Lancaster suggested, Taylor wasn't just a star. She was the queen of control, beautiful, brilliant, and dangerously unyielding. Yet if Taylor was a queen of manipulation, Lancaster believed the next man on his list was far worse, an actor whose charm concealed the heart of a predator. Kirk Douglas, the predator in human skin. Few actors define the Hollywood golden age like Kirk Douglas. With his chiseled jawline, commanding voice, and iconic performances in Spartacus and Paths of Glory, he was the symbol of strength, heroism, and resilience on screen. Yet according to Burt Lancaster's private notebook, the reality behind that heroic image was something far more sinister. Lancaster described him bluntly, a predator in human skin. Douglas, he claimed, wielded power like a weapon. He didn't just compete in Hollywood, he conquered it, crushing anyone who dared stand in his way. Casting sessions became battlefields where he forced producers to bend to his will. Directors were pressured, rivals were undermined, and young actresses were targeted with offers that were never truly optional. One chilling example stands out. In 1959, a rising actress named Lisa Avery was abruptly dropped from a major production. Her only mistake? She refused Douglas's invitation to a private dinner. Lancaster suggested this was no coincidence. It was a calculated punishment, a reminder of what happened to anyone who dared defy him. But Douglas's control extended beyond casting couches and studio boardrooms. Lancaster wrote that he turned drugs into instruments of coercion. By providing them, or withholding them, He tightened his grip on directors, producers, and co-stars, ensuring their silence and compliance. Those who resisted often found themselves mysteriously removed from projects or placed in dangerous, career-destroying situations. To the public, Douglas was a Hollywood hero. To Lancaster, he was a man who lived behind a mask, hiding ruthless ambition and cruelty beneath the roles of noble warriors and courageous leaders. His charm wasn't simply charisma, it was camouflage. His influence wasn't merely professional, it was predatory. In Lancaster's words, Kirk Douglas embodied the darkest truth about Hollywood's golden age. Behind the shining lights and silver screens lurked monsters who wore human faces, and Douglas, for all his acclaim, was one of its most dangerous predators. But Lancaster's revelations didn't stop there. From predators in power to actresses weaving webs of deceit, the next story shifts to Natalie Wood, the woman whose tears could control Hollywood itself. Natalie Wood. The fake tears that manipulated Hollywood. With her delicate beauty and hauntingly sad eyes, Natalie Wood was one of Hollywood's most beloved stars. To audiences, she was innocence personified, the tragic heroine who always seemed fragile, vulnerable, and pure. But in Burt Lancaster's secret notebook, Wood appeared under a very different light. To him, her tears were not signs of weakness. They were weapons. Lancaster claimed that Wood carefully staged her emotions to bend people to her will. On one film set, she deliberately fainted in front of the crew, forcing production to halt for nearly 10 hours. The motive wasn't exhaustion or illness, it was pressure. By orchestrating the scene, she manipulated producers into firing a co-star she disliked. Such tactics made colleagues tread carefully around her, fearing that a single wrong step could end their careers. But perhaps the darkest shadow surrounding Wood was her mysterious death in 1981. Officially ruled an accident, Lancaster hinted otherwise in his writings. He suggested that her passing was the inevitable price of years of manipulation and deceit. Just weeks before her death, Wood allegedly threatened to destroy a close friend's career if they didn't follow her instructions. When she drowned off the coast of Catalina Island, Lancaster chillingly wrote, "The sea did not kill her. It only concealed what she left behind on the shore." For Lancaster, Natalie Wood was not a tragic victim of fate. She was a strategist, one who lived by control and died by the weight of her own ruthless games. If Natalie Wood used fragility as her weapon, Mickey Rooney relied on cruelty. Behind his cheerful smile was a man who thrived on torment. Mickey Rooney, the man who took pleasure in torment. On screen, Mickey Rooney was the cheerful boy wonder of Hollywood, the mischievous teenager, the comic relief, the performer who could make audiences laugh through the darkest days of the Depression. But behind the curtain, Burt Lancaster described a man whose cruelty was anything but childlike. In his private notes, Lancaster wrote that Rooney did not simply humiliate others, he enjoyed it. Background actors and crew members were often his favorite targets. He mocked their hairstyles, costumes, or the smallest mistakes, not in private, but in front of the entire set. According to Lancaster, Rooney's satisfaction came from watching people break down under his words, laughing afterward as if their pain were his personal victory. But the torment didn't end on film sets. Within his own home, Rooney's wives lived through a darker version of his abuse. Lancaster revealed that Rooney turned marriage into a prison, forcing his partners into both emotional and physical servitude. He controlled every detail of their lives, using intimidation and violence as his tools. One shocking incident occurred in 1967 when Rooney slapped his wife across the face on a film set simply because she was late. The crew froze in horror, but no one dared intervene. His repeated marriages weren't tales of love and companionship. They were stories of domination, fear, and eventual collapse. For Lancaster, Mickey Rooney's legacy was not just his films, but the scars he left on those closest to him. Behind the smile that charmed millions was a man who thrived on cruelty, leaving broken lives in his wake. But even Rooney's cruelty could not compare to the consuming force that Lancaster described next: the legendary Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe, the black hole that devoured Hollywood. To the public, Marilyn Monroe was Hollywood's brightest star, the blonde bombshell whose smile lit up the screen and whose allure seemed irresistible. But in Burt Lancaster's notebook, Monroe was described not as a fragile victim of fame, but as a force that consumed everything around her. He called her a black hole that devoured Hollywood. Lancaster recalled the filming of Some Like It Hot in 1959 as a prime example. Monroe frequently disappeared from the set without warning, leaving the entire cast and crew waiting for hours. Production stalled, tensions rose, and yet no one dared confront her. Lancaster wrote, "She didn't just pretend to be fragile, she turned fragility into a weapon, and everyone else became trapped in its gravity." Her manipulations weren't limited to delays. Monroe also exploited her romantic liaisons to exert control over powerful men in Hollywood. In 1961, she began a secret relationship with producer Jack Warner. When Warner suggested she collaborate with another actor, Monroe staged a dramatic emotional breakdown, pressuring him to abandon the idea and give in to her demands. The fallout created chaos for the production, but Monroe walked away with her influence intact. According to Lancaster, Monroe's beauty and vulnerability weren't masks hiding weakness. They were her sharpest tools she used to bend an entire industry to her will. For all the love she inspired on screen, behind the scenes she left a trail of frustration, manipulation, and broken trust. Marilyn Monroe was not just a star, Lancaster suggested. She was a consuming force, one that Hollywood was powerless to resist. And if Monroe was a black hole that devoured attention, Errol Flynn was a devil in disguise, his elegance hiding a life of decadence and crime. Errol Flynn, the devil in a gentleman's suit. With his dazzling smile and refined charm, Errol Flynn seemed the perfect Hollywood gentleman. From Captain Blood to the adventures of Robin Hood, he embodied courage, elegance, and romance. But Burt Lancaster's secret notebook stripped away the glamour. Behind the polished exterior, Flynn was described as a devil in a gentleman's suit. According to Lancaster, Flynn's private life was a spiral of decadence. He hosted notorious parties where drugs, prostitutes, and violence mingled in grotesque spectacles. What many mistook for glamour was, in reality, chaos carefully hidden from the public eye. Even more chilling was his ability to escape accountability. Lancaster wrote that when Flynn was arrested for drug trafficking, he used his Hollywood influence to walk free, continuing his vices without consequence. The justice system, like the studios, bent under his charm and power. Women, too, were victims of his predatory appetites. Flynn lured them with promises of fame, only to discard them when they no longer served his desires. For Lancaster, these weren't isolated scandals, but a pattern of corruption, masked by wealth and celebrity. On screen, Flynn was a swashbuckling hero. Off-screen, Lancaster insisted, he was something else entirely, a predator cloaked in elegance, a reminder that Hollywood's brightest legends often carried the darkest shadows. From Flynn's reckless indulgence, Lancaster turned his pen to Spencer Tracy, a man whose demons were fueled by alcohol and manipulation. Spencer Tracy, the devil in the dressing room. Spencer Tracy was hailed as one of Hollywood's greatest actors, admired for the depth and humanity he brought to roles in films like Judgment at Nuremberg. Yet in Burt Lancaster's secret notes, Tracy appeared not as a wise mentor or heroic figure, but as what Lancaster called the devil in the dressing room. According to Lancaster, Tracy's weapon of choice was alcohol. He didn't simply drink for pleasure, he drank to dominate. Once intoxicated, his temper erupted, leaving crews walking on eggshells. Lancaster described how Tracy would smash bottles against tables in fits of rage, sometimes over the smallest mistakes, like a makeup artist applying powder the wrong way. But it wasn't just violent outbursts. Tracy also used psychological manipulation to control those around him. He could shift from saintly charm to ruthless intimidation in an instant. If persuasion failed, he threatened self-destruction. Lancaster recalled occasions when Tracy would imply suicide if a co-star resisted his demands, a cruel tactic that left colleagues terrified and compliant. Behind his iconic performances, Tracy cultivated an atmosphere of fear. He thrived on the tension he created, bending both cast and crew to his will. To the public, he was a brilliant performer. To Lancaster, he was a man who weaponized charm, alcohol, and despair, leaving scars far deeper than any role he ever played on screen. But if Tracy's tyranny came through rage, James Stewart's cruelty was quieter, colder, and far more calculating. James Stewart, the man who judged others to audiences, James Stewart was the very definition of decency. From Mr. Smith Goes to Washington to It's a Wonderful Life, he embodied honesty, kindness, and the spirit of the American everyman. But in Burt Lancaster's secret notebook, Stewart's name came with a far more unsettling description: the man who judged others. According to Lancaster, Stewart's cruelty didn't rely on loud confrontations. It thrived in silence. On set, he developed a habit of quietly noting the mistakes of his co-stars. At the end of filming, those notes would be passed to the director, ensuring that colleagues lived in constant anxiety, never knowing when their flaws would be used against them. Lancaster also recounted a disturbing incident in 1957, when Stewart flatly refused to act alongside a black actor. Instead of open protest, he hid behind script requirements, using excuses to achieve his aim without ever raising his voice. The result was the same: exclusion. But his method left others too intimidated to challenge him. Even more alarming were Stewart's tactics off-screen. Lancaster alleged that he once forged documents to discredit rivals. A single sheet of false accusations enough to destroy reputations and careers. Colleagues learned that resistance came with the risk of public humiliation and professional exile. Stewart's genius was that he didn't need to shout or threaten. His mere presence, Lancaster claimed, could make a room feel small, as if no one was worthy of sharing the space with him. To the public, he was America's moral compass. To Lancaster, he was a quiet executioner, armed not with kindness, but with judgment sharp enough to ruin lives. Still, Lancaster believed judgment could take an even harsher form. The next entry on his list was Stewart's close contemporary, Henry Fonda, Hollywood's invisible judge. Henry Fonda, Hollywood's invisible judge. On screen, Henry Fonda was the embodiment of moral strength. In The Grapes of Wrath and 12 Angry Men, he stood for justice, fairness, and quiet dignity. But in Burt Lancaster's secret notes, Fonda's power came not from compassion, but from what Lancaster called the silence of a judge who kills without lifting a hand. According to Lancaster, Fonda rarely raised his voice or struck anyone. Instead, he used cold silence as a weapon, freezing those around him with disapproval so sharp it could cut deeper than words. His presence created an invisible courtroom where he alone decided who was worthy and who would be condemned. This cruelty, Lancaster suggested, was most devastating at home. Jane Fonda herself admitted she grew up under the shadow of a father who never offered praise, never gave protection, and rarely expressed love. Instead, Henry imposed strict control, shaping his children through fear rather than warmth. For Jane, every success was muted by his indifference, every mistake magnified by his icy stare. Colleagues weren't spared either. Lancaster claimed that Fonda's silence could push fellow actors into despair, sometimes even to the brink of breakdown. Without shouting or threats, he could dismantle confidence and reduce a room to unease. To Hollywood, Henry Fonda was the symbol of decency. To those who knew him privately, Lancaster insisted, he was an invisible judge, delivering sentences not with fists or fury, but with silence that left scars no one could see. And yet, the darkness didn't end with Henry. It carried forward into the very next generation, through his daughter, Jane Fonda. Jane Fonda, the brainwasher with an angelic face. Jane Fonda rose to fame as a talented actress, admired for both her beauty and her fearless activism. To the world, she looked like the voice of justice. But in Burt Lancaster's notebook, her name appeared with a chilling description: the brainwasher with an angelic face. According to Lancaster, Jane's power wasn't rooted in violence, but in ideology and in the way she weaponized her fame. On one film set, she demanded the firing of a cameraman simply because he was a Christian who disagreed with her radical feminist views. When her demand was rejected, she threatened to hold a press conference accusing the production of discrimination. The threat alone was enough to paralyze the crew with fear. Lancaster recalled her telling him directly, "If you're not on my side, that means you're against justice." To him, this revealed the heart of her strategy. She didn't need force. She only needed a stage, a microphone, and a crowd to pressure people into submission. Through public shaming and relentless ideological pressure, Jane Fonda turned colleagues into allies or enemies with ruined careers. Her angelic face and activist spirit inspired millions, but Lancaster believed they also masked a ruthless manipulator who bent people to her will in the name of justice. But Lancaster's notes show that Hollywood's darkness was not confined to ideology. It seeped into family homes, where Bing Crosby's cruelty turned fatherhood into tyranny. Bing Crosby, the man who always forced others to obey to the world. Bing Crosby was the smooth-voiced crooner of White Christmas, a man whose calm demeanor seemed untouchable. But Burt Lancaster's secret notes exposed a chilling contrast. Behind closed doors, Crosby ruled his family with fear. Lancaster wrote that Crosby's cruelty wasn't loud or violent at first, it was icy. He used silence and a piercing stare as psychological weapons, reducing his children to trembling shadows. On one occasion, he forced his son to stand shirtless in the freezing yard, claiming it would teach him the feeling of failure. But the abuse didn't stop at intimidation. Crosby beat his children with belts and golf clubs, leaving scars both physical and emotional. His son Gary later confirmed it, confessing, "I would rather be the child of anyone, even a criminal, than be his child." To Hollywood, Crosby was a symbol of warmth. To his family, he was a tyrant. Lancaster concluded that his legacy wasn't harmony, but obedience built on fear. And from father to son, that same cruelty lived on. Lancaster described Gary Crosby as a tragic reflection of his father's abuse. Gary Crosby, a distorted reflection of Bing Crosby. If Bing Crosby's home was a fortress of fear, then his son Gary became its most tragic product. To the public, Gary tried to follow in his father's footsteps as a singer and entertainer. But in Burt Lancaster's notebook, his story appeared as a dark warning. Evil is not always born. It is taught, repeated, and passed down like a curse. Gary's childhood was defined by violence. Beaten with belts, humiliated in front of his siblings, and struck with a golf club by the man the world adored, Gary learned early that pain was power. And as he grew older, he repeated the very cruelty that had been inflicted upon him. Reports surfaced of Gary assaulting his girlfriend, smashing a director's windshield simply for excluding him from a dinner, and lashing out violently over trivial disputes. Addiction followed him everywhere. Alcohol, drugs, and the company of prostitutes became tools of escape, but also weapons he used against others. Lancaster wrote chillingly, "He does not know how to love. The only thing he knows is how to make others afraid, because that is the only language his father left him." What made Gary's downfall so haunting was not just the scandals, but the realization that he was living proof of a cycle, an echo of Bing Crosby's tyranny, magnified in the next generation. Abuse had not ended with him. It had been reborn through him. To Lancaster, Gary Crosby was less an individual villain and more a mirror. He reflected the twisted lessons of his father, showing how cruelty breeds cruelty until it consumes everything in its path. But Bing and Gary weren't the only ones whose families carried scars. Lancaster next pointed to Joan Crawford, a mother who replaced love with violence. Joan Crawford, the woman who preferred violence to solve everything. Joan Crawford dazzled audiences with her commanding presence on screen, but at home she ruled with fear. In Burt Lancaster's secret notebook, she was remembered not as a glamorous star, but as the woman who preferred violence to solve everything. According to Lancaster, Crawford's children bore the brunt of her cruelty. Her daughter Christina later revealed disturbing details, being beaten with a coat hanger, or having a comb snapped across her hand while Crawford coldly remarked, "Pain is a woman's first lesson." These weren't isolated punishments, but part of a pattern in which violence replaced affection, and fear stood in for love. Crawford's appetite for control extended beyond her family. Lancaster claimed she used drugs and intimidation to dominate those around her, ensuring that every environment she touched bent to her will. She wasn't just an actress in Hollywood, she was a dictator in her private life, determined to keep everyone under her command. To the world, Crawford was elegance and sophistication. But to those who lived with her, she was a source of terror, proving that even Hollywood's brightest stars could cast the darkest shadows. And finally, the last name in Lancaster's notebook, Lucille Ball. To the world, she was laughter incarnate, but behind the curtain, she was something far darker. Lucille Ball, the haunting smile of a razor's edge. Lucille Ball was once America's sweetheart, the red-headed queen of comedy, whose laughter seemed to brighten every home. But in Burt Lancaster's hidden notes, that laughter carried a darker edge. He called her the haunting smile of a razor's edge. As the head of Desilu Productions, Ball ruled not with charm, but with tyranny. Lancaster described her as a psychological dictator who kept a secret notebook of employee mistakes. Everything from how they smiled to how they knocked on a door. 3 strikes meant instant dismissal, no explanation given. Her cruelty was often public and humiliating. On one occasion, she forced a writer to rewrite an entire script overnight, only to call him into a meeting the next day, laugh loudly, and throw the pages back in his face. That laughter once saved CBS, Lancaster wrote, but it also crushed the spirits of dozens who worked beneath her. Ball's control went even further. Lancaster claimed she had microphones hidden in meeting rooms to spy on employees, rooting out anyone who dared question her. For those exposed, the consequences were devastating. To the public, Lucille Ball was joy incarnate. To Lancaster, she was a razor hidden behind a smile, sharp, cold, and merciless. And with this final revelation, Lancaster closed his list. 14 names, 14 stories of cruelty hidden beneath the glow of Hollywood's golden age. Burt Lancaster's secret notebook pulled back the velvet curtain on Hollywood's golden age, revealing that beneath the glitter and fame lay a world fueled by manipulation, cruelty, and fear. The icons who once symbolized elegance and heroism were, in his eyes, deeply flawed, sometimes even monstrous. His words remind us that stardom can conceal as much as it celebrates, and that power, when unchecked, often corrupts. Hollywood's story is not just about films and fame. It is also a cautionary tale about human nature. Talent and charisma can inspire millions, but without integrity, they can also destroy lives. Now, the question turns to you. Which of these stars do you think was the most ruthless? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next story that dares to reveal the truths hidden in plain sight.